left me with the keys to the store. Thank you, everyone, for being here. We've got 3 items on the agenda tonight. And are we still going with license plate reader for our first item, Mr. Fearborn?
We are, sir. The beginning of this particular presentation will be the ghost voice from behind me, and then the chief will come up to the table as soon as she gets done making the initial point of the presentation. Chief?
Thank you, sir. I am going to show you all a brief video that will tell you much more about the license plate reader than I can. And so if you'll bear with me here.
LSAG is the world leader in license plate recognition. We started in 2004 with 3 customers in the United States. We've grown today to have over 1,800 customers throughout the world.
The coolest aspect of this technology is that it is quick. You can run a lot of plates very quickly. You can do it without having to spend a lot of time and attention to doing it. You can work your radar, you can watch for other violations.
So a lot of what I'm going to talk about just here really briefly is what the video obviously shows you about the license plate reader, which is the Leonardo LSAG Hunter M6. You saw some of the other variations, obviously covert cameras mounted, in places, where the drivers can't see them, on light poles and in other locations, but obviously our LPR is going to be, or is mounted on a vehicle, and you'll see some pictures here of the vehicle that it's mounted on. Those cameras read those license plates both day and night. Infrared during night to see those numbers on the license plates, and then color to give us a description of the vehicle as well. Those mobile systems process plates on parked vehicles, on moving vehicles, beeping continuously as it's reading everything that it sees. I'll tell an interesting story. Captain Wilson has had it out a number of times. Mr. Fearborn was out with him today. It is reading every number that the camera actually sees, and came back with a hit on a stolen car, but it was actually the numbers on the side of a FedEx truck. So what the officer obviously operating that vehicle has to use some common sense about, this obviously is not a stolen auto, these numbers that the camera is viewing. as it's beeping continuously, because it's reading hundreds, if not thousands, of numbers on everything that the camera is looking at. As you saw, and I recognize that the, let me see if am I doing this right? How do I advance, Jim? Where is Mr. Cataret? There he is.
You want to advance through your slides?
Yeah, it's just a lot of pictures.
You're
There's,
in PDF, you're gonna have to pull, if you want to show the slide, you're gonna have to pull the
I'm
bar
sorry.
here on the side, slide it down, because you're in PDF instead of PowerPoint.
there you go. Thanks, Jim. And Councilman Holman, thank you, sir. As you saw on the video, the plates are processed up to 150 miles an hour, and that's both advancing toward the camera or passing away from the camera. So if you've got, an officer, going 60 miles an hour this way, and the drivers of the other vehicles coming 60 miles an hour the other way, it's going to capture those numbers, both advancing and Jim, you can just go ahead and move through those. These are just pictures of the vehicle that we have the camera currently on. So we get both sound and visual alerts that are sent to the officer instantaneously upon identifying a suspect vehicle. And Mr. Fearborn can talk a little bit about, how really irritating that constant beeping is. The captured data includes date and time stamps, GPS coordinates, and obviously a photo of the license plate. It's good information, obviously, for knowing, where that vehicle is being used throughout our community, because we're able to track, where that officer is setting up and where we're utilizing the vehicle. And you all probably remember when we were discussing the purchase and deployment of the license plate reader about, making sure that our policy is not specifically targeting particular parts of our community and things like that. So the GPS allows us to do that from a management standpoint, to make sure that that vehicle is being utilized in the places that we want it to. As I mentioned, the infrared camera capturing the information on the license plates day and night, and then the color camera as well, to give us a more accurate description of the vehicle. Currently, the LPR is using data from mules. And only from mules at this time. And we're working with, I had a conversation with Sheriff Weber last week about using the HIDA database. And if any of you all are familiar with the high intensity drug traffic area, which is HIDA, which is a massive database used by the DEA, and we'll be working with them. But currently we're only using the data that's available to us in mules. And so there's lots of databases out there that we'll be able to use going forward. It's just, takes some, work with them for us to be able to interface with those as well. So that's currently in limbo. And then, as the video mentioned, the LPR can assist us with stolen autos, stolen license plates, the identification of unlicensed drivers, Homeland Security efforts, amber and silver alerts, which I understand that Mr. Fearborn was particularly interested in the silver alert and how that works, and how that works according to Captain Wilson.
It was thrust upon me by the captain in an example.
He had a lot of particular questions about the silver alert. I don't really understand what happened, but it's going to be a great tool. We're very excited about, getting our folks trained on how to use it. Currently, obviously, just on that one vehicle. But, we're going to be looking at all different sorts of applications, obviously besides just patrol. This is going to give us some opportunities to, get out there and look for some folks who are, and our officers, I do have to say, when you read their weekly report, you see that, our officers do an outstanding job of finding people. I think this week's weekly report was 9 arrests and 45 warrants cleared. So our folks do an outstanding job in clearing warrants, but I think this is going to be another tool that's going to help us do an even better job. Does anybody have any questions for me?
So this is not a mobile device. It's not mounted on street light poles or anything like that. This is on a particular police vehicle?
We have mounted it on a particular car. We won't be moving it from car to car or even to other locations like streetlights or street, sign poles at this time, but we certainly could.
Okay, because I noticed in my area, on one of the light poles, there was a box chained to it. So I was curious what it was, what that was. It doesn't look like this. It's just in the height of it, just caused some questions. So I'll get with the city manager to see what that's all about.
Yes, sir.
Does the LPR have the ability to notice if the license plate that is supposed to be on a red car, can it notice that the car is not red, or is that the officer's?
No, it does not give that kind of
I
information.
didn't think it would, probably.
But the type of vehicle that it should be registered to, this is a Buick, it's on Ford, that kind of thing. Yes.
When you said the beeping's kind of annoying consistently, is there a volume button? I'm assuming that you could tone it or turn it down for the officer who's on a long shift, so it doesn't get to the point where it's kind of distracting the officer because of that beeping constant, or?
I don't really know the answer to that. Do you, sir, know if you're able to turn it down?
Captain Wilson and I were out for about a quarter of an hour and had 570 beeps.
But who's counting?
Yeah. And that's not annoying at all. My worry would be if you turned it down when the alarm, we didn't have a single alarm. But it would worry me that you might be able to, it may turn the alarm down too, so you wouldn't hear that. But you also get a flashing red siren effect too.
There is absolutely no doubt, and as Mr. Fearborn indicated, there were no alarms, during the time that he was out with Captain Wilson today. But there is no doubt when you have a hit on that machine. I mean, bells and whistles and looks like, police, strobes and all that to let you know that you've had a hit on that. But again, as I mentioned with the FedEx truck, hitting as a stolen auto, then the officer has to use some common sense about, what am I seeing here and what is this hit that I'm getting on the machine. So, yes, absolutely. No, he was in the car with Captain Wilson.
Oh, you were, so he knew where you, okay. He knew where you were.
There was no worries about him being lost.
Thanks, sir.
Mr. Jacobs.
So walk me through this. I know we went through some of the processes up there, but I'm curious, so is the officer in the vehicle the only one who knows, or is there a signal back to here, back to the communications?
Back to dispatch, and yes, yeah,
Okay.
we are able to, depending on how we configure the system going forward, you saw that, to like an emergency operations center or to dispatch. So yes, so that they're getting that same information real time as the officer, so that the officer's not having to, especially if it looks like it's going to turn into a chase situation or things like that, that dispatch is knowing it at the same time that the officer is.
Okay, great. That was my question. Thank you.
Councilmember Duggawa.
Thank you. Just to clarify, Chief, it sounded like you were saying that you're using one data set right now and hope to be using another. Is that you can only pick one, or we could use multiple at the same time?
No, we'll be able to use multiple ones at the same time, and so because we're using mules now, and it's our hope that we'll also be getting on board with HIDA as well. We'll have multiple sets of data that we'll be able to ping off of.
Councilmember Berenson.
Thank you, Mr. Holman. For the chief, I guess first to follow up with her question, if we go to the HIDA database, is that a fee-based program, or we would need a budget amendment for that, or?
No, not at all. That's
Okay.
It's just a matter of the technology to make it so that we can interface with them. We actually we had license plate readers when I was in Kansas City that were deployed when I was still with Kansas City, and we used HIDA pretty frequently. So no, that is not something we'd have to pay for.
Thank you. And then the second question, I noticed on one of the slides, it showed the license plate numbers, but it showed a small picture of the actual license plate.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're driving down, say, 58, where there's a lot of traffic, and it does get a hit on a vehicle, will it display that in a larger font, or will it actually show a picture of the vehicle as well? What does the driver see, visually on that screen?
It does.
when he
It
gets
shows,
ahead?
and that's the reason for the color as well as the infrared. So you're going to see a picture of that license plate and then also that vehicle so that you can so you're not looking, the officer is not looking for those tiny numbers on the license plate. They're looking for a red Ford. So they're getting that picture
Okay.
as it displays.
All right, thank you, perfect.
Councilmember Barber?
Thank you. Obviously, brand new. You guys just getting your feet wet with this. Am I right to assume that, say, in 30 or 60 days, could we kind of get a report on how it's going and how it's working and what's not working?
Well, I was actually going to make the offer, much like Mr. Fearborn, that if any of the council members wanted to go out and ride, I would be happy to do a follow-up report in 30 or 60 days. But if anyone would like to go out and ride with the officer driving the LPR, I'd be happy to do that.
Well, I wear hearing aids, so I just take them out, and I would be perfectly fine with that.
Okay. But I am happy to come back and let y'all know how it's going.
Any other questions? I wanted to say, Chief, we got two, right? And they're both on the same vehicle, is that right? We bought
No,
two.
that is one set of cameras. That's one license plate reader on that one vehicle.
Okay, I see. Yeah, I'm share Councilmember Barber's comments and thoughts that I'd like to know, I don't know if it's 30 or 60 days or more, maybe 6 months, but just kind of what you and the department think of the tool and if it's advanced the cause. I think that, as I've said a number of times, I think there's both the operational benefit of this. The officers are out using it. They get a hit on a stolen plate. Maybe they make an arrest, or we have an Amber Alert and they recover a child, or whatever it may be, a warrant arrest, that kind of thing. But there's also having that tool available in crisis mode. Kansas City has done this on a number of times when they had the highway shooter a few years ago. It's one thing when the chief says, all the officers are out there on the street, but when you can tell people, we have some of the latest technology out there helping us look for what's going on as well, especially in our community where safety is so prized and set such a high bar with what our police department does. I just think this is another great tool that we can provide you with, and if it works out really well and you feel like you need future resources to add to this in the future, and either in terms of more cameras or perhaps adding onto the system where dispatch and the other cars pick it up, whatever that looks like, it's something that we would certainly want to consider in budget negotiations.
And as Councilman Townsend said, obviously, this is the hunter mode. It's a mobile, but there are covert cameras. There are cameras that could be moved. Much like deer cameras, if you have a problem in an area and you need to, mount a camera someplace for a period of time to help address certain crime problems and things like that, that type of camera might be a great addition to the one that's mobile.
Thank you, Chief. Anyone else? Mr. Fearborn, are we ready to move on to item 2?
Thank you, sir.
This is street preservation, correct?
That's correct. Mr. Grass.
Would you mind passing out the handouts there, sir? What I wanted to spend a little bit of time about, in years past when we've brought forward the pavement management program or the pavement management report, we've talked about, the pavement condition rating and those type of things. And how we arrive at that, and then how we rank the streets. What I wanted to talk about a little bit tonight is the other half of the pavement management system, which is our maintenance, how we perform maintenance, why we perform maintenance. They talk about doing the right thing at the right time. So what I'd like to start with is is this handout, and I'll just kind of walk you through a little bit, starting a little bit. What causes the asphalt to crack? As the pavement ages, it loses asphalt, the oils, which makes it become brittle. So what you then have is you've got within the pavement mat, you're going to have a differential of temperatures from the surface of the mat to the underlying subgrade. That creates a thermal difference and different properties, and it expands and contracts differently across the pavement map, so pavement mat. So if you flip to the second, what happens is these stress points develop into a crack. And then as the crack develops, on the next one, you'll see water gets into it, and then it freezes. When it freezes, it heaves the pavement up a little bit. Then what happens is the pavement doesn't settle back after the temperature warms up. Remains a void underneath the pavement. The vehicles go over it, pavement flexes, and then you'll get another crack. And then that continues, and that's why you'll see the alligatoring and some other things on the pavement. That void continues to grow, the pavement continues to distress. The next slide I want to talk about is what you've got is a curve that represents the age of the pavement and how it decays over time. Also, what's there is what type of maintenance you do when. So very early on in the pavement life cycle, you really want to be doing your routine maintenance. Routine maintenance is crack sealing, some isolated patching, but really doing all you can to keep the moisture out of the subgrade. Then as the pavement ages a little more, you move into your preventative maintenance. And in our case, there's a number of things you can do in that area. There's slurry seals, chip seals. Our chosen method is microsurfacing. And so if you flip a couple of more slides, there's a picture of what the crack seal does to the crack. And then I wanted to talk a little bit what microsurfacing is, what microsurfacing isn't. Microsurfacing is a surface treatment. It is not intended to be a mill and overlay. It's not intended to rehabilitate the pavement. What it does is it will fill in some low depressions, or it can fill in low depressions in the pavement. You use it in combination with the crack filling. It'll fill in the smaller cracks. It will also, with the aggregate, provide more traction. So you'll see we'll go from what the pre-pavement mat is. It'll be smooth. A lot of times the aggregate is polished. There's not a lot of friction there and for stopping. So what you do is you put in a little coarser aggregate with the microsurface, and that increases your coefficient of friction. Friction is good when you're trying to stop. So the reason we do all of this is on the next one is the pavement life curve. It's the cost of doing these type of things. There's a major order of magnitude where crack sealing will cost you $1. Microsurfacing is $6 to $8 per square unit. Overlaying is, again, over and above almost 10 times what it is to crack seal a road. So what we really, and the big reason we're doing this is on the very last slide. We are trying to push and extend that pavement life curve. We want to push it into the green area. That's where we get the benefit of the surface treatments. The more we can do that, the more we delay the need to mill and overlay and keep it out of the major rehabilitation area. That being said, there are times when we bring forward a program, and the next 2 years of the pavement management system, we are going to be working in the lower end of the curve, the rehabilitation area. So at the 11 by 17 maps there show you the program for 2020. This is an extensive mill and overlay program like we did last year, if you recall. We did Fox Ridge Drive, where we had a lot of the block cracking, where there were the large gaps and rideability. We're addressing a lot of that this year, and we will be addressing a lot of similar situations next year. After that, we will be getting back into and away from the worst first. Worst first is not where you want to be, because you're using a lot of your dollars and not treating other areas. So we will be pretty much caught up to where we're back into our normal pavement cycle. This year you will also see some extensive crack sealing on on 58 Highway, as well as some patching in some other areas where we've got a few minor pavement failures. Moving forward with 58 Highway, we are targeting 3 years from now to do a complete mill and overlay of the project. So depending on, so like 2024. And what we will be doing there as well is, and one thing that you don't think about is, we will also be crack sealing between the curb and the pavement. That is another source of moisture. When you see the water coming up out of the pavement and wonder where it's coming from, it's going down under the curb, along the subgrade, and then up. So we've got to get that sealed, and then after that, we will be into a regular cycle of every 3 to 5 years microsurfacing, again, to push that curve further along. So what I've given you is a kind of a 2-year snapshot of our pavement program. Unless there are any significant concerns with this, our plan is to get this out for bid as soon as possible. With that, I am available for any questions.
Mr. Townsend?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem. Excellent presentation, as usual. And this is an example of very focused work effort, very thoughtful use of city funds, and making sure that we are put a program together that makes sure our streets are taken care of and managed appropriately, so we don't have to have a pothole czar in our city. While there may be some, but it's not as bad as other locations.
We have pothole elves, and so.
And I appreciate it. So as I look at these two location maps, as I understand the heading, these are mill and overlays for what's identified for these 2 years upcoming.
That's correct. And I want to caution, 2020 is set. 2021 is projected, and we'll be reevaluating before we move that.
Okay.
Move forward with that.
Because one of the areas of concern that Mr. Jacobson and I had questions on was the roundabout at Dean and Lucy Webb, and I see that's on there. So to the residents who were concerned about that particular area, that's on slate for this, 2020. Scheduling to be determined as the year comes on, but I appreciate
Right.
that.
What you will see in the short term is Public Works operations will be band-aiding it, but there needs to be some extensive traffic control there to be able to do the work, so we're going to reserve that for when we're under contract.
Some rerouting and such, understand. Okay. And don't know if this is, well, I'm going to ask the question, you can tell me from out of line. The particular area, I've had several questions about the property on the northeast corner and the dead tree that's there. I don't know, concerns about, I think that's private property, so I don't believe that the city has any way of saying, other than if it's a safety hazard, the trees are in the right-of-way or walkway, to have that property owner do anything with that. But that's just a concern I've had on a couple of occasions with regard to that particular corner. So if we could, if there's any good neighbor thing we can do with respect to that, I don't know.
Mr. Catarat, is there anything we can do?
Sorry.
Your department can tell Mr. Rouleau. There is a tree on the northwest corner of the roundabout
It's
at Dean and Lucy Webb that's dead and laying there, but it's in private property.
Is it obstructing sidewalk?
At this point, it's more or less an eyesore. It's not, the debris that dead trees, cleared back, even from the turning radius of any vehicles need to move, from my assessment. It's just, an eyesore.
Yeah.
So.
Not a specific code violation, but we can certainly work with the property owner to try to get it cleaned up, yes.
Yeah, that's probably.
We will do that.
That's what I assumed, because it's not any obstructions of any way, so, okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Catarat. Sorry to catch you by surprise.
Mr. Circo.
Thank you, Mr. Holman. As Mr. Furbo and I talked earlier, then we're going to have these major projects going on, the roads and resurfacing and what we're doing on these main intersections and streets. Looks like North Sunset down to South Sunset to pick up that. And we talked about still be able to do some little patching as we go, though, or will we have our crews so busy they won't be able to, or will it?
This is capital fund.
Okay.
We do pothole patching every
Okay.
single year out of operational.
Oh, great,
Yeah.
because that's what I'm getting from people, even with the new curbs in, they're still.
And even with this, again,
Yeah.
this is 2020 set in stone. The 2021 will be reevaluated to see if the deterioration levels that we thought continue, will continue to spend the pothole money from street patching and operational, because this is just capital. And of course, we are estimating the number of streets that can be done in 2020 based on very, very tight, but they're still estimates. So if the bid comes in lower, then that money would also be available for additional patching, et cetera.
What we don't identify is we do set aside money for significant roadway patching as part of this program. So, for example, if you drive up North Fox Ridge, there's some patching there where the road is, you can see where you got to kind of move around a little bit to avoid scraping. So those type of things. Kurzwell Road is another spot. So although we don't specifically identify them here, we do set aside money for patching under this program.
And also, want to identify, obviously, the two outliers to this entire program are where we're basically at 1880s asphalt, which is Ward Road and Kurzwell. Those are identified with the GEO bond issue. The good news on asphalt is we have just received the bids for Westgate Drive, and they were $200,000 under budget. Contingency, I know.
Yes.
Mr. Burke.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem. I just wanted to say congratulations on this list, because it's like you can hear the stuff that I say out loud that no one else in the car wants to hear. North Madison definitely is a good priority.
Anyone else? I had a question. Will these, we have the interactive map on the city website, and it identifies a number of things, economic development projects and zones, parks project. I assume this will be part of that as well?
Most definitely.
Yeah, that's great for people that get on there and want to see this kind of stuff, so it's good stuff. I also want to make a comment, Mr. Krass. I think this is fantastic. I would concur with Councilmember Townsend that this is very well thought out planning, and there are a number of our less fortunate roadway authority neighbors who unfortunately are just trying to get by. And unfortunately, as you know, that translates into, it's on one of your slides here, what's known as deferred maintenance. And as you take deferred maintenance further and further out, it's going to cost you more and more the longer that deferred maintenance goes, because it's going to get more expensive with each year. And I think you've got a very well thought out plan here to keep us out of deferred maintenance. And I think that's great. The transportation network in our city is so important to our citizens and certainly to the economy as well. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Krass, I'm going to ask you to stay there until we get to item 4. Thank you.
Looks like the next one is the Administrative Policy Manual, sir.
Yes, thank you, sir. Would like to have opening bell discussion about our current administrative policy that includes a 35-mile residency radius for everybody in the city, with the exception of the city manager, who rightfully should live within the city limits. The council has, with a number of the changes that you all have made to policy, improvements to our salary and benefit package, have made it, made Raymore a very attractive place to work. As our reputation continues to grow throughout the metropolitan area, people are very interested in coming to Raymore and being employed here. What that means, that's a good thing. But what we are finding increasingly is that people who want to work here don't even have the eligibility to apply because of the 35-mile radius. While we advertise positions, and this is kind of one of the bigger anomalies, while we advertise nearly all of our positions through Mid-America Regional Council MARC, the 35-mile radius doesn't include the entire MARC. In fact, it's not even close to including the MARC 9 county regional area that they represent. So people are seeing us advertise on MARC and then looking up the residency requirement, and we're getting the, as you can imagine, why are you advertising someplace where I can't even apply? Our current residency radius doesn't include such notable locations as Clinton and Nevada to our south, Warrensburg, Holden, and Kingsville to our east, Kearney, Excelsior Springs, Smithville, Platte City, Lansing, and Leavenworth, and Tonganoxie to our north and northwest, Ottawa, Lawrence, and Baldwin City to our west. With the current interstate and highway system, if we were to increase the residency radius to 70 miles, then persons coming in would be using the interstate and highway system. No one would be beyond an hour away from getting to the city limits at any given time. I feel very strongly that this is a management issue. It's not a distance issue. It's going to be a management issue, and sometimes is, at a 35-mile radius. It's going to be a management issue at a 75-mile-an-hour radius, or 75-mile radius. I promised myself I wasn't going to say miles per hour, and there it came. If an employee is required to be here at 7, if they're required to be here at 8, if they're required to be here for an evening meeting, and they're having difficulty making those times, we have a management and supervisory issue, and that employee needs to be taken care of accordingly as a disciplinary matter. That being said, it is currently a 35-mile residency radius in the Administrative Policy Manual, and I'm kind of here tonight to gauge the council's temperature on bringing this forward for an Administrative Policy Manual change in the near future to a 75-mile residency radius.
Mr. Burke?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem. Clarifying question, is there anything in the policy that says that they need to live within this distance within a certain time period of employment?
No.
That might also be a possibility. I don't know
When,
if that
when you
works.
say deployment, what do you mean, sir?
After employment, after.
Oh.
Obviously, I mean, there are times that maybe we might go in a wide range to find, say some kind of a director position that would not be in the Kansas City area.
I apologize. I heard your question wrong. Yes, they have 12 months to come within the 35
Okay.
mile.
That's what I was hoping it said. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem. Mr. Fearborn, I appreciate you bringing this to us, and I would agree. It is a management prerogative. It's not, I don't think it's in the best interest to set a mileage limit on employees. I would ask that, do we want to make another exception? In addition to yourself, would we want to consider exceptions for some senior management or senior emergency response personnel? Maybe police captains or emergency management, things like that.
As far as exceptions?
Yeah, I mean, I guess what I'm saying is that I agree with your suggestion on changing it to 70 or 75 miles. But do we want to make that for everybody, or do we want to have some certain personnel, like yourself, you're in the city limits, do we want to require some senior level personnel to be closer than that 70-mile radius, maybe back to the 35? Again, for example, our emergency management person, our director, that's somebody we'd probably want to be here in less than an hour's time if something happened, or maybe other senior level personnel. I'm just asking the question and floating the idea out there that we might want to consider that.
And when I had this discussion with some other city managers who do have an extended length for those particular personnel, let's say that something happened that was particular to Raymore. We were hit with a tornado, which is obviously one of the drills we do regularly. It's not going to be getting them there in that time. It's going to be getting them, once they hit the city limits, it's going to be getting them to where they need to be, because highways here will be closed. So whether you're 35 miles or 70, and this is what, it happened, and I was actually speaking with the Joplin Assistant City Manager about when the tornado hit down there. It wasn't getting the people there, it was actually getting them to where they needed to be once they actually hit the Joplin city limits, because everything was, I mean, you couldn't even tell where streets were at that time. When we have done the 2 emergency management drills that we have done, people were forewarned. I could see there being a value with a couple of the positions, but more, it's in, for instance, when we know or are predicting a heavy rain, we actually need public works personnel to be in here, maybe even more than the emergency management director, and those are the events that hit us more frequently. That is, as I said before, kind of a question of management, not the same type of management, but we present that to the employees well in advance. We know, for instance, all of the public works employees that are going to be coming from Pleasant Hill that aren't going to be able to get here because the streams flooded over. And so we will hold those folks over at night here in town. Obviously, some of the events are unexpected, so you couldn't predict on those, but you know, there are certain positions I know that folks even internally feel they need to be within a certain mileage. So maybe what staff could do is look at that, and when we bring it forward to you formally, kind of have a candid discussion with a couple of our senior managers and see if they would be willing or have any objections factually to being in tighter than that.
Thank you. That leads to one more kind of follow-up question. So the people, our public works personnel that are, I know they're on call at times. When those folks are on call, what's their response time? Do they have an hour or a half an hour? Do they have a defined response time if they are called in to?
They have a defined time, not a response time.
Okay,
so
so
they go to 12-hour shifts and they know when they have to be here. And if they can't be, again, it's the prior planning, we put them up here.
okay, but we do have personnel that are on call at certain times as well. So when those people are on call, and we call them in, do they have a certain amount of time in which they're supposed to be here by?
Go ahead, Mike.
Typically that occurs. Sorry. Typically that occurs with the flooding events, and so we'll pre-stage people, or we'll put them on notice. And the way we've got it set up through emergency management is we've kind of looked at our personnel and see who's the closest, who's got the highest route in, because there are some challenges the further out you get within that, as far as roads being flooded and things. So we will, during an ice event, we will pre-stage people. We will put them up in hotels. I will overnight at Public Works. The assistant director will. So will Ryan Murdoch during these events. There's typically enough notice of any type of weather event where we will pre-stage.
Mr. Barber, I think you were next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem. Kind of educate me a little bit and go back. Why would we have a mileage limitation to begin with? Where did that all begin?
There are a number of locations that are moving away from it.
So was this back when our employees were riding horses into town, or?
It makes,
before cell
candidly,
phones?
it makes less sense in
I
a
guess I'm-
metropolitan area than in, say, a very remote location where people are necessarily going to be even further away coming from a metropolitan location to try to get to a Blue Eye, Missouri.
Well, to me, just trying to, I read this and thinking about a 35-mile circle to begin with, you could be north of the river, and it's going to take you a heck of a lot longer to get here than it would be if you were 50 miles south on 71 or 49 driving up. So the 35 miles, to me, is really ambiguous. I think, to me, I mean, we don't own these people. They're adults. They know they got a job to do. Why would there be a mileage at all? I don't think they're, other than if we want to identify a couple key personnel, but for, I don't see why there'd be a mileage. I don't know of any industry really that does that. You have time to show up, you have a job to do, and so.
It's taken number time. Mr. Burke, I think you were next.
Thank you. It sounds like the goal of this is to increase our candidate pool, which in that case, that's a great idea. I think 70 is probably a good idea. More than that would be very difficult for someone, and I think at a certain point, if they were here employed for a while, they would choose to move closer because it would give them a pay increase by not spending that gas. And so I think that kind of natural occurrence will happen without us regulating it.
I'm not sure, Mr. Jacobson, or you or Councilmember Delgawad. Will go with Councilmember Delgawad on this one.
Thank you, sir. I think, in my opinion, the wanting people to live close, and maybe my memory's wrong, but it seemed like we used to have a more strict requirement than 35 miles from the city. And I think it was more about encouraging our city staff to be involved in the community, encouraging certain staff members to live here, to be involved in the community. If you live within 35 miles of the community, you're more likely to come back to an event that Parks is doing, or come back for even a staff event in the evening, or more likely to come back to Raymore and participate in the parks and the amenities and the events and things that we have here, versus if you're traveling 70 miles to come to work, by the time you get home to your family, you're not going to drag them back an hour and a half down the road to come to an event. So in my opinion, asking our employees to live closer to the city encourages them to be involved in the city, to be involved in things the city is doing, to be involved in shopping at the places we have here in the city because we're convenient to them. So I understand that we would be able to broaden our opportunities for employing other people. Some of the additional information I might like to have in looking at this would be the history of the policy. Was there a more strict policy before this 35 miles, and when did that increase or change? Other cities' policies, I mean, if cities around us have this same policy, or cities like some of the cities that Mr. Fearborn named have similar policies, changing our policy, I don't know if that's really super relevant, but if all cities have some kind of policy like this, we're all shopping from the pool close to us, versus really being able to reach out. And then I wonder if that would change also we talked about like emergency flooding and a weather event, but police response time, would that increase for police department as well? So those are just some questions I have.
Mr. Jacobson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem. I was just going to comment on a couple things. Number one is, as I recall, the policy is council-driven by council members of the past. Specifically, I recall Councilwoman Hubach specifically wanting people to live in the city, to your point, have skin in the game. And so I'm not even sure she was in favor of 35 miles. And it was fairly strict. And back in those days, back when we were a smaller city, you could kind of see it where we're going to grow and we want everybody on the same team. But I do know, if you look around, and especially after attending an MML meeting that we went to here a few months ago where they were talking about that, the times are changing. The workforce is getting tougher to find skilled employees. And when we're talking about particularly our city staff, I mean, look at how professional and how good our city staff is. It's going to be challenging for Mr. Fairborn and other department heads to find people of the caliber that we have living in the city. I'm not saying they don't, but if we have an opportunity to go out and get the highest caliber employee, much like a baseball team, if you have a chance to go get a George Brett or somebody like that, or recently football, if you have a chance to go get a Patrick Mahomes, and Patrick Mahomes lives 70 miles away, don't you want Patrick Mahomes playing for your team? And I think the same situation exists here with our department heads and our staff. I actually thought it was a little restrictive back in the day, quite candidly, and I still do. I understand, I mean, it is kind of a push and shove situation. Of course you want people to be involved in the city and want the best for the city, but if you're a professional in your field, if you're a police chief, if you're a community developer, if you're Parks and Rec, that's your profession, and you should want to do it to the best of your possible ability no matter where you're working. So frankly, I think 75 miles makes sense, especially in this day and age. I can tell you that this is a bit extreme, but for instance, at this MML meeting, we were hearing from a consultant who helps San Francisco and Baltimore with their cities, and one of the things she was saying is, hey, 10, 20 years down the road, you may be talking to someone about your water bill, and it may be someone who lives in Santa Fe, New Mexico, because people work more remotely now, and that's kind of the way the workforce is going. So 75 miles is a lot closer than Santa Fe, New Mexico, which is a bit of an exaggeration. But anyway, I do think it's a management situation versus a council situation. I know the council, of course, should weigh in as far as how involved we want employees to be. But if we want to find the best, then I think we have to relax our restrictions a little bit. Thank you, sir.
Councilmember Duggan?
Just to add a couple of other things, just from my work during the daytime, I know one of the number one reasons that teachers leave a job is for a job closer to home, because driving, lots of wear and tear on your body, your car, lots of gas money. It's hard with daycare when you're far away. So I worry if we extend this that we're going to be training up a lot of people to go somewhere else. They'll find this job far away and then move to a job closer to home. And kind of along the lines of what Mr. Burke said, I think the only benefit of this would be that eventually, hopefully, they would move here.
Councilmember Barber.
I still kind of think it's, it's kind of a personal decision where you live, and I don't think the city should really have any bearing in that. And then we get to the have to or want tos, you can force somebody to do something. And in my experience, that's temporary. If they want to do it, then that's more permanent. And we've got 100 employees here now. What's the chances of losing an employee, a good employee? We've got a lot of money in training because maybe they want to buy a farm 50 miles out south of the city. They can't do that now. They legally can't do that, or there's always ways around things, but I'd rather keep everybody honest, and I'm still a believer that, if we hire good people, we have good management, we have good policies, we don't need to tell people where they live, what kind of house they live in. That's their decision.
I concur with Councilmember Barber and Councilmember Jacobson. I've been against this policy dating back to the first time I was elected to the council. It actually came up with our previous city manager on an individual basis. All you're doing with the current policy is keeping the honest people honest. I think if you really did a hard target search, we ask initially, we look at the address. We don't go out and verify that every year, nor do we want to. If somebody's at 36 miles out, we're not looking to tag somebody and say, hey, you're 100 yards over the line. these policies date way back, not just ours, but within the region, back to the days before cell phones. With the type of communication network we need today, we don't necessarily have to have a police captain on scene for him or her to be giving guidance and orders and things like that. These policies also predate a lot of the MOUs or memorandums of understanding between cities. If we have a major crime event here within the city, we're certainly going to be calling Belton PD, Cass County Sheriff's Office, the Highway Patrol. It's the reason that we're going to have multiple agencies sharing that command vehicle that we have. So it's become a much more regional area than it ever was. And as Mr. Fearborn said, with the transportation network and the interstate system we have, people can certainly get here. I am so far on the other side, I don't think we should have any limitations. Just that's my opinion. Again, if people want to work here, this is a good place to work, and they want to live 60, 70 miles away. I know, for example, a lot of people that work at the Ford Clay Como plant, they'll live 2-3 hours north and drive that every day for 25 years or more. And again, if they don't show up or have trouble showing up, that's a management issue. That's not a policy issue at our level. Did you just need a consensus, Mr. Fearborn? Is that what you were looking for?
I'd look for a consensus. I have the questions that I need to be answering within the memo that would go with the ordinance. Okay.
Looks like we have, I'm seeing nodding of heads from at least 6, so I think we probably do have consensus, sir.
Thank you, sir.
And we do have something under
Staff has
other?
another, and it's
Yes,
the
sir.
reason I asked Mr. Krass to wait. You may remember that last week, or maybe it was the week before, in executive session, we brought some potential litigation to you relative to Hawk Ridge Park. And candidly, it was the fact that the chosen consultant engineer for that group had come up short, we openly admitted, and that it was only by having an incredible engineering and public works staff that we were able to basically take up the significant amount of slack that group had left behind and shoulder the burden ourselves. To that end, Mr. Krass, if you would impart the latest information.
Sure. Thank you. We were informed today by the, earlier in February, in late February, we submitted Hawk Ridge Park to the American Public Works Association, Kansas City Metropolitan Chapter, as a Project of the Year candidate for projects $5 million and under for structures. We were informed today that they are moving that forward to the national level and have nominated it for Project of the Year out of the Kansas City metro area for that project category.
That's outstanding, sir.
That concludes staff reports this evening, sir.
Does anyone else have anything under other? We do have reason to go into executive session tonight, sir. Is that correct?
We do.
I would entertain a motion at this time. Mr. Barber.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem. I move that we go into executive session to discuss litigation matters as authorized by Missouri Revised Statute 610.021, subsection 1.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to move into executive session. Mr. Zerger, will you be taking the roll call?
Councilmember Townsend?
Yes.
Councilmember Jacobson?
Yes.
Councilmember Serko?
Yes.
Councilmember Burke?
Yes.
Councilmember Berenson?
Yes.
Councilmember Abdulgawad?
Yes.
Councilmember Barber?
Yes.
Councilmember Holman?
Yes.
Entry into executive session at 8 p.m.
Thank you, sir.